Hey, everybody, welcome to Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have you with us, along with the rest of our DawgNation team, Mike Griffith, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley. We will do a lot over the course of our program tonight, looking ahead to Georgia's game against Vanderbilt, looking way ahead to the future of UGA athletics as they now pursue a new athletic director after the announced retirement of current AD Greg McGarity. And we'll also spend some time here looking back on some Georgia players who could be playing their last home game on Saturday against Vanderbilt. In fact, here on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau, I want to start right there. And if you don't mind, let me take a second to say this, that one of the things, maybe my best and worst quality simultaneously, is I'm like hopelessly sentimental. I'm very corny about stuff like that. So senior day and things like that always really work on me. I get very easily nostalgic about things like this, even the recent past sometimes. And for these seniors here this year, particularly the 2017 class, when I think about the seniors, even though a large number of the people who count as seniors for Georgia right now did not sign at Georgia as part of the class of 2017. But when I think of Georgia seniors, that is the group that I kind of, think of there. And, I remember back in 2016 when this team was losing games to Vanderbilt and Hail Mary to Tennessee, bad game against, Florida, Georgia Tech at the end of the season. It's easy to kind of look back at the beginning of the Kirby Smart era and feel like it was all just sort of kissed by the sun from the very moment that it started, but it kind of wasn't. And there was a lot of naysaying near the end of the 2016 season, and there was a lot of malaise kind of setting in by the time the 2016 season came to an end. But with the recruiting success that Georgia enjoyed the class of 2017, those players validating the program under Kirby Smart, I think has set the stage for the success that Georgia's enjoyed in recent years. When I think about these seniors, that for me is one of the first things that comes to mind. Jeff, you know a lot of these guys personally. What comes to mind for you when you think about the Georgia seniors?
Well, I guess, first of all, I can't help but drift. I know it's a senior day and you had to spend the 4 years, but Brandon, my mind is kind of melded around the signees of the 2017 class. And I do think Swift. I do think Andrew Thomas. I do think Jake Fromm. This blows my mind, guys. Remember that signing spectacle when everybody first came in? Remember D'Angelo Gibbs was a part of this? Everybody thought that it would be LeCount and Gibbs back there at safety wreaking havoc, literally before anybody knew what havoc actually meant for the Georgia football program. 19 million references later. But, when we get down to it, man, to me, like every year they leave a sentimental guy. Some years it's Hot Rod, some years it's David Jacobs going back a long way as the last senior introduced. For me, man, it's got to be Richie, man. That's what I think of this day. My gosh, if he's in pads and ready to go, or if he's not in pads, that's going to strike a chord, Brandon, for the sentimentality in all of us. If in some ways you were using a lot of big fancy words there, Brandon, but I would say that in some ways this is a way for Georgia to wrap their arms around a lot of these players, especially guys like Malik Herring, Ben Cleveland, who's been there through it all the entire time warp of Georgia football, Richard LeCount, unsung guys a little bit like Justin Schaefer, and so on and so forth. I mean, man, it's going to be a time where, to me, Brandon, I think about Georgia tried recruiting the biggest names, the best players one way that they could in the state in 2017, and they've kind of pivoted away from that a little bit. And it's funny to see, it's unique to see how things are moving forward now.
By the way, I love the backdrop, the Hawaiian shirt or the tropical shirt with the beach there behind you. Very, very certainly fitting for you, because I know you were just at the beach, and I guess you're kind of living back through that again. So we'll have a good time watching you, at least in our mind, imagining you still being in that beautiful beach behind you. Mike Griffith, when you think about these Georgia seniors and the legacy they live behind, what will you think about?
Bittersweet legacy. Jeff said this is a group of guys that help establish Georgia as a national championship contender on an annual basis. Taking control of the rivalries, dominating Tennessee, winning the last, 4 games against Auburn now, 3 or 4 games. I know they lost that front game in 2017, but got revenge in the championship game. Dominating Georgia Tech to the point it's really not even a rivalry anymore. Really taking care of business, but falling short, bittersweet, Andrew not playing in the final bowl game, Jake leaving a year early. If he comes back this year, I think this team probably is at least playing for another SEC championship. Richard, tough decision to go out in a motorcycle when he gets back on a trip, very costly injury. Justin Schaefer, regrettable night in downtown. So close, and putting George on the doorstep of the championship, right? But just not quite getting over it. And this is a pain. It's the go-between step. The team that does win the national championship for Kirby, those are going to be the guys that are remembered, right? Like I covered the 98 Vols. They're still the biggest show in Knoxville. 22 years later, we can still tell you who's on the 98 Vols team. What Georgia team is going to be that? I think these guys came so close. The Rose Bowl memory, is such a great memory for everyone. And yet the next game was, to me, it's a great group of guys, took a very big step for Georgia, made Georgia a national championship contender, but just fell short of that goal, that greatness they had to win the national title.
Connor, I'm curious what you think about this, because while as a fan, I will revere the group that eventually wins a national championship more than any other, that does not, for me, mean that I'm going to ding a group for whom they're not able to get that done. This group included. It is not a blight on their resume to me that they did not win a national championship, even though this group came close. The fact that they did come close, for me as a fan, is something that I actually want to celebrate. How about you, Connor? When you think about the group, what do you think about?
Jeff sort of hit on this. I think of Richard LeCount, a guy who was the very first player to commit to Kirby Smart, who bought in before literally anyone else did. And he is a guy who Kirby gave some tough love to. He made some steps, played in some big games, made some big plays in those big games. One of the things I wrote a story about Richard today, so we're talking about the impact he's had on this Georgia program. And one of the things I sort of opined on in there is, you think back to 2nd and 26 and Dominic Sanders gives up that play. I think seeing what we've seen out of Richard LeCount, you wonder, what if Richard LeCount was that senior safety? And unfortunately, the ending this year, both within the confines of the season and then the traffic accident that has knocked him out of the past couple of weeks, it's a tough pill to swallow. But I know a few weeks ago, Mike was trying to build him a Hall of Fame statue and get him into the College Football Hall of Fame. Richard LeCount is a truly great individual. He is up there with the Nick Chubbs, the Sony Michels, those types of players in recent lore. And to Jeff's point, I hope he gets honored and celebrated, because I know if there were a non-pandemic year and there were 90,000 fans cheering for him, it'd be one of the last ovations we'd have heard in Sanford Stadium all year.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that winning a national championship is just really, really hard. I'm not making excuses for Georgia and why they haven't won it. Certainly every Georgia fan can kind of chronicle all the ways in which they've been close, including this group. And every Georgia fan can express their own frustration about that not having happened yet. But Jeff, for me, as I said a moment ago, I'm not going to hold that against the class of 2016, class of 2017, guys who came to Georgia at a time in which it wasn't that vogue to choose Georgia. Let's just be honest about this. The recruiting momentum that Georgia enjoys for the class of 2021, and we'll certainly talk about that a lot in the days ahead, a lot of that foundation was laid when these guys chose Georgia back at a time in which they had no way of knowing if Kirby Smart was going to be a good coach or not. They had no way of knowing if some of these promises about all the things that he hoped to build at Georgia were going to come true or not. Some of those things have come true. Some of them maybe still yet to come true. But those Georgia players at the time were all buying into a promise. But if Richard LeCount doesn't do that, if, even guys that haven't played a ton, Trey Blunt, Nate McBride, guys that were pretty big recruiting wins at the time, if you don't get yeses from those guys back then, the five-star names who have become so prevalent and so common for Georgia in recent years, maybe they're making the same decisions guys like that would have made prior to 2016, 2017, which would have been a school in the SEC other than Georgia. So I've got to give these guys credit for what they've gotten started at Georgia. Even if ultimately they didn't quite finish the drill, to use a Mark Richt phrase, they certainly got something pretty important started. And maybe it's just a heavy dose of optimism in my mind or positivity, but I find myself thinking a lot more about that for them here in what could be their final home game.
Brendan, you take my mind in two places. Let me use my visual aids over here, okay? This part over here by the hut, that to me represents, and I guess I'll hit the shadow here first. I guess the word I come to is unfulfilled. If we asked anybody on this panel, anybody on the feed, Remember the first year for these guys, Brandon? It was a storybook, the scrapbook, the run for the roses. They played for it all. They won an SEC title. Remember everybody on the stage with roses in their teeth? I remember Brandon with roses in his teeth.
I do too.
And if we'd asked every one of us to a man, we're being
Quite
honest.
a visual, by the way.
Yeah, we had to get that in there. I act like I'm on the set of Cocktail right now. So, I mean, Cocktail Part 2. But for me, it was like, to a man, and we'd all admit to this, we didn't think that was the apex of the careers for these young men. We all thought Georgia'd get back. They'd run for it again. They'd be in the Final Four again. They'd make a playoff run again. They'd play for it all again. But really, that was the quan. I mean, that was the epicenter of all the good stuff. But Brendan, you got me thinking about recruiting, and this is how truly spoiled everyone is. You said Malik Herring. I went and looked back at that this week. Malik Herring was the number 154 overall recruit, and he's a top 10 defensive end. That was huge back then for Georgia to get a top 10 defensive end, top 150 prospect. Now that would be Elijah Judy, man. That would basically be, what Georgia's got now with a guy that's nowhere near anywhere in their class. Elijah Judy decommitted, but now for Georgia to get a top 10 defensive end or 150 overall recruit, it's kind of like, yeah, been there, done that, bought the crazy Hawaiian shirt. Mm-hmm. But it just shows, man. I mean, like, I guess spoiled is the word. Malik Herring, you think of all those great players. I can remember one Richie story. It's the Rising Seniors game right after he had committed. And this is 2016. He walks into that hotel, the Georgia Tech Hotel and Conference Center, and he is walking in the lobby going, dog, 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 dog. All these men are dogs. They just don't know it yet. I mean, he's literally walking up to him saying, he gets them all in the room and says, no, guys, we're going to all go to Georgia together. We're going to win a national title together, and we're going to put Georgia back on the map. I mean, I just think of that hope, that optimism, the start of that journey. And for some ways, I think a lot of folks would agree that we all expected it to go a little bit farther than this, or at least get back to where it was in 2017.
Mike, I'm curious of your opinion on this. Obviously, you have to use some careful language around senior night on a night like this, or senior day for Georgia this year, because some guys do have the option of returning. It's not clear to me how many Georgia players even consider that as a realistic option. I'm imagining that some probably do. And I guess it's going to be a pretty busy month of, December into January as some of these guys make those decisions. Are there Georgia players that you think that maybe some think are playing their last game that maybe they're not? Maybe they are going to make the decision to come back in 2021. Do you have specific guys on your mind around a topic like that?
Yeah, it's tough, Brandon. I look to the guys that have accepted Senior Bowl invites, and I see Malik Herring and Trey McKitty. And I thought Trey McKitty would have been a good candidate to come back. Really didn't have the most productive season. And, of course, now with JT Daniels and the promise of the passing game, it would seem like that'd be an opportunity. But I think the COVID-19 has really just, made it really miserable on these college kids. I mean, it's hard enough to try to balance 20-hour work weeks along with, your online classes, workouts and the COVID-19 restrictions that you have and the distancing. And I think that's probably had an effect on some of the kids' judgment. But I look around, I mean, Monty Rice with the foot injury, could he benefit from a fully healthy year? Yeah. Do I think he'll come back? No. I wondered about Richard LeCount, honestly. I mean, I thought Richard was sailing along with a second or third round draft grade. And, after the incident and the injuries, I mean, I just don't know what he's going to be able to do at the combine. He's going to have a lot of questions to answer from those scouts. He doesn't really have a full senior. He was sailing along. Like Connor said, I think he was headed towards, legendary legacy status. So I look at that. I wonder about more like juniors though, Brandon. I wonder about, could Azeez Ojulari maybe want to come back and be a lottery top 10 pick instead of going early second round or something like that. I wonder if a guy like Jordan Davis, same thing. Could he want to come back and maybe be a top 5 pick instead of being, maybe a second round pick? Those are the guys. And when Kirby talks about Alabama a lot, but those guys at Alabama come back if they're not in the top 15 in the first round. Can Georgia get to the point where guys come back if they're not in the top 15, or will there be more Riley Ridleys and McCole Hardmans that are happy to go as 3rd and 4th round picks?
Connor, I think what Mike is saying there is undeniably true. And frankly, I don't have a good reason for why Alabama has been so successful at convincing players who weren't yet first-round picks to come back to Alabama. You know, they're lottery guys, to use a phrase that's not really appropriate for football, but they're first-round guys all kind of go, and you can't really fault them for doing that. But non-first-round picks seem to come back for their senior years at Alabama. And at Georgia in recent years, that just hasn't quite been the case. I don't really know what the difference is necessarily, but what Mike's saying, I believe, is true.
Well, you look back at last year, Andrew Thomas was a first-round pick. Isaiah Wilson was a first-round pick. DeAndre Swift was the number 35 overall pick. So in some cases, those guys were high-end picks. The thing to watch this year, and as Mike points out, I'll mention 2 names he didn't throw out there. James Cook and Samir White, what do they do? Because you look back to that 2016 team when it was a disappointing season, and Nick Chubb and Sony Michel certainly could have gone. They would have been mid-round picks, and you wonder where their NFL careers would have been from there. They come back. Sony Michel goes 23rd overall, or 31st overall, excuse me. And Nick Chubb goes 35th overall. And they both benefit from that extra year of coming back. And obviously Georgia benefits off that as well. So the big thing going forward, as Mike sort of alluded to, is how many of these juniors that, yes, they're draftable players, Jordan Davis and Azeez Ojulari and Eric Stokes, how many of them can you convince to come back again this season, specifically on the offensive side of the ball? Because last year, Richard LeCounte did come back. Stokes did come back. Malik Herring came back. It's been the offensive side of the ball where you maybe haven't seen those guys come back. And because of that, you just look at the offensive struggles Georgia's had. I think there's some connection there.
I mean, Jeff, when I look at this, and listen, I don't pretend to be a draftnik necessarily, but, you know, guys like Monty Rice prior to the season were kind of mentioned in that upper tier of inside linebackers available. And that's not always a first-round pick position. It can be if you've got, you know, Kevin White or Roquan Smith, someone like that. But it's not always the kind of place where you work your way in to the first round necessarily. The same thing for Jordan Davis, who I've seen mentioned in that kind of top 3, top 4 defensive tackle-like situation. Sometimes it's a glory position. Sometimes it's, you know, not necessarily one of those. Maybe for guys like that, they don't really see the possibility of moving much higher, you know, up the threshold than that. But there's also the situation where, so in the Georgia secondary, you know, you see Eric Stokes, a lot of the stats. He's had pick 6. He's had big plays. Tyson Campbell only has the 1 interception, but would not surprise me to find out NFL draft scouts like him just as much, even though from a statistical standpoint, he's been less productive. And, you know, he's even been hurt and off the field a good bit, but because of his athleticism, because of his body type and things like that, that's one of those guys. And there may be a number of these guys in the Georgia roster who are well liked by draft scouts, even though sometimes we may not really feel like we've always seen the best of them when on the field.
Yeah, I think, you know, one point I wanted to come back to, everybody was wondering why Alabama does it and Georgia doesn't. I think the difference is a lot of the Alabama's guys don't get their first real cracks at film and starting time until maybe junior year, late sophomore year, because everybody at Bama was content with waiting a year and a half. Think of Mac Wilson waiting a half, being that special teams guy. That's the same thing Reuben Foster was. And then they went into a junior year as kind of their marquee lap year. And maybe sometimes they came back because they wanted to have that 1 year as the guy and garner all the Lombardi, Outland, all SEC, All-American, Football Writers Association of America, those laurels and everything else like that. I still have a hard problem with this because I hear young men saying this all the time. If you tell them they're a top 35 pick, a number 1 pick, they got to go, man. They absolutely have to go. And I mean, I think we can't expect folks to be like Chubb and Sony, because I think that's what makes Chubb and Sony so special. I don't think if it was just a Nick Chubb at Georgia, or if it was just a Sony Michel at Georgia, I think one and the other were like the yin and yang that strengthened each other coming back. Now, I remember those stories, and Nick and Sony didn't have those conversations. They just came out and said, I'm going to stay, without even any conferencing with one another. But I think sometimes they could have told, like, I remember the stories of how bad that 2016 season ended with a loss to Tech, almost losing to a directional Louisiana school, losing to Vanderbilt. They didn't want to go out that way their senior year as Bulldogs like that. And I think those are kind of the tugs for a lot of these guys. And let's face it, I think you hear a lot of people around the league talk, around the conference talk. I think Mike's right. I think Richard LeCounte was a second rounder. I think maybe Jordan Davis was a second rounder. I think they're so close, and Richie has, been around for so long. I think it's kind of the point where he has to make that move.
It is Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have Jeff Sintel with his beach vibe going tonight. It's almost like a, was it Malik Maka? Is that the
There you go.
Hawaiian Christmas song? Jeff's got a little Malik Maka going there. Connor Riley, Mike Griffith, all here as well. We're presented by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. You know, Georgia Farm Bureau, they don't live on the beach where Jeff does. They live, work, and play in communities just like yours in the state of Georgia. Now, I guess if you live in coastal Georgia, then they are right there with you there for that. The point is they're all across the state. They are always the home team. They step up and support our agricultural community in our state, really going to bat for Georgia's farmers. And that is such an important thing. They help you save money on your home, your auto, your life insurance. Such a valuable asset in your life. So you're going to want to check them out. GFBinsurance.com. That's the website to go to, GFBinsurance.com. That'll get you in touch with the Georgia Farm Bureau. And you can find out for yourself why what I said a moment ago truly is true. The Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, let's move on here to topic 2 on our Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. And Georgia will actually play a game on Saturday after it honors its seniors. It'll play Vanderbilt as about a 5-touchdown favorite this Saturday afternoon. But for Georgia, much like the last couple of games against also perceived overmatched opponents, it's a chance for Georgia to showcase its abilities, work on getting better in some regards. And with that in mind, Connor, I'm curious, what do you want to see, or what should Georgia fans want to see from Georgia on Saturday?
I'll go hot off the top here. I will say both a fourth quarter pass from JT Daniels and or a fourth quarter pass from Carson Beck.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Beck, because here's what I've been telling people, that if Beck is not the number 2 quarterback, then he's probably not going to play. I mean, they're not going to leapfrog him ahead of Stetson Bennett, even though he's the freshman and people want to see him. And I don't really know why that is. And I don't know that it necessarily means that Carson Beck's behind schedule or anything like that. But just given the fact that, you know, last week he was kind of only perceived to be the number 3 quarterback, the chances of him playing don't seem all that great to me. Am I wrong for saying that?
Well, I think you know what you have in Stetson Bennett at this point. He's had enough snaps to sort of know what you can get from him when he goes out there. We don't know that with Beck. And I think you look at what Clemson has done, you look at what Alabama has done. They've gone in when they blow teams out, and they blow teams out a lot. What they do is in the second half of those games, they give their young players a chance to sort of treat that like a real game option in situation there. They're not trying to run out the clock. They want to see what Bryce Young can do. They want to see what DJ Uiagalelei can do. And I think similarly, you know what you have in Stetson Bennett here. Find out maybe a little bit what you have in Carson Beck and sort of get him some on-the-field action. And I know Kirby Smart has said, guys come here to play games. Carson Beck did not come here to be a third-string quarterback.
Let me play devil's advocate on that point, Mike, for a minute, though. Can't you make a case with JT Daniels, who told ESPN this week that he's still not fully 100%, although it sounds like in his mind he's close. He's only now going into his 3rd start as a Georgia quarterback. If you're trying to figure out what you have in somebody, isn't it Daniels who you still are trying to figure out what you have in? And I said that with all due respect to Carson Beck, who I'm obviously curious about too, but Georgia's in kind of a unique situation where they've got an entrenched starter now in Daniels, who is still relatively new, and you haven't quite examined all of his capabilities yet or what the offense can do around him. If you're looking to see some more of someone, Mike, isn't it still Daniels that you're looking to see more of?
Well, it's not just Daniels. It's Daniels throwing to George Pickens, or Daniels throwing to Arian Smith, or Daniels throwing to Darnell Washington, getting that chemistry, you know, building that relationship, building that confidence that you can do it in the game. I know Kirby says they take whatever they give you, but it's Vanderbilt, man. You can take whatever you want. If you're Kirby Smart, you can literally name your score. You can run whatever offense you want, and you're going to dominate, just like you could have done at South Carolina. So this take what they give you stuff. Look, you're Georgia. You don't have to just take what they give you. You're better than that. You think Florida just takes what teams give them? You think Georgia just gave Florida 571 yards? Hell no. Florida came out there and they took it, and they made Kirby and the Dogs like it. So Georgia needs to develop that identity and have a savage mentality on offense. You got the flashy shoulder pads when somebody makes an interception. What do the guys get when they do something on offense? A pat on the head from the head coach? How about getting them something to celebrate? How about changing the mentality so that it's fun to play offense for Georgia, so you don't have a 5-star receiver out there blocking 95% of the game and only catching 3 passes? I think Pickens might squirt Kirby with the water bottle if he doesn't get 10 targets sooner or later. I mean, that's why you recruited him. There is some truth to that headline and the comment that Connor pulled out that night out of the JT Daniels press conference, don't recruit these guys if you're not going to throw to them, BA. You know that.
I think it's a great quote that JT Daniels gave. I'm 100% with you on that. But let me respond to something that you just said. Let me bring everybody into the conversation here. What people who don't watch all of our programs might not be aware of is that, Mike, you weren't happy with what you saw from Georgia offensively last week.
To me, Kirby says game reps are so valuable. Game reps are so important. And then you ask him about Arian Smith, and he says, now there's a guy that needs a lot of work. Okay, well, let's put 2 and 2 together. He needs a lot of work. You're beating a team handily, and you don't bother to throw him the ball, but you give the guy that's literally the fifth string running back right now 14 carries. So what is it? Does Arian Smith need the work? Are the game reps valuable? Or does your fifth string tailback, who, by the way, next year will be the fourth string tailback, does he need that work? And can't your offensive line get work in pass blocking? Or does it only count if they're run blocking? There's a lot that didn't add up.
So I'll play devil's advocate with you now. I played devil's advocate against Connor a moment ago. I had Terrence Edwards on DawgNation Daily today. Terrence normally does the post-game show. He saw you filling in for him on Saturday. And one of the things that he said on our show today was, as kind of a pushback against the idea that the Georgia wide receivers weren't having fun on Saturday, what Terrence said, I'm going to try to paraphrase him the best that I can, is that he saw those guys celebrating, arms in the air with every touchdown. They were high-fiving. They were running around. They were having a good time. That on the basis of body language, by the way, Terrence said he's also talked to Jermaine Burton the last couple of days as well, who, kind of validated this. They were having a good time on Saturday because they were putting up 45 points. They were, moving the ball offensively to the tune of about, 10 yards per clip totality in the first half, 9 yards per carry on the run. That they were having a good time on Saturday in Terrence's own words. And, obviously he knows some of these wide receivers personally. What would you say in response back to that?
I'd say I've heard from parents that validate that they're not happy with the play selection. I'd say that there are issues in the locker room, and that if you think that Kirby Smart is going to continue to recruit 4- and 5-star receivers throwing 16 passes a game, it ain't going to happen. When's the last time that Alabama, Florida, Clemson had 2 games in a season with 14 and 16 passes? I mean, Kirby Smart has got to decide what he wants this offense to be. One game you're seeing 401 yards passing, the next you're seeing 139. One game you're seeing 8 yards rushing, the next you're seeing 332. What is it going to be? Don't act like these other teams are just so good that you just only can take what they give you. We've just heard Jeff talk about all the 5 stars and how much talent Georgia brings in now. Don't act like those guys aren't capable of doing what they want against South Carolina and Vanderbilt.
Jeff, I want to bring you on this, but let me respond to one thing, though, Mike. If you're going to bring Alabama into it, it's fair to point out, in the game they won 63-3 against Kentucky a couple of weeks ago, on the final 3 drives for Alabama in that game, they only threw 1 pass over the course of the entirety of those drives, and all of the other carries, they were all resulting in touchdowns, but all the rest of the carries were carries to running backs that I'm presuming were their 3rd and 4th string running backs, because it wasn't Brian Robinson, it wasn't Najee Harris, and it wasn't Trey Sanders either. Maybe he's hurt. But these were all running backs that were just as low on the depth chart for Alabama as Deshaun Edwards is for Georgia. So if you want to make the comparison to Alabama, what Georgia did last week against South Carolina is really not that different than what Alabama has done in blowouts games this month alone.
I would disagree. After the first quarter, Georgia had 225 yards of offense and 21 points. That would have projected to 900 yards and 84 points. Georgia shut it down.
But how can you disagree with facts?
Quicker.
How can you disagree with facts? They had their final 3 drives, they threw 1 pass. Alabama
because
did.
Georgia's offense wasn't as aggressive as Alabama's in the second and the third quarter before Alabama pulled the plug. Kentucky has a good defense. Remember, Georgia scored 14 points against them. It was all about the game plan and how you approached it. Kirby wanted to get the run game back on track. He did that. But in the first quarter, BA, you got 225 yards and like 75 passing yards. In the second
but there are
quarter,
only 14 teams in the country that throw for more yards per pass than Georgia ran for against South Carolina. For the season, there are only 14 teams more efficient through the air than Georgia was on the ground.
Well, that's great if you want to be the 14th team in the country. But the last time I checked, these guys are trying to be number 1. So we're talking about what does Georgia need to do to be number 1, not number 14, not number 13, not number 12, not better than last year. But does Kirby Smart need this offense to evolve? You got a 5-star quarterback. You got George Pickens. I saw a passing line of 10-16 for 139. I'm telling you, that's a no-go and a non-starter. And Kirby's got to change that if he wants his locker room back.
Jeff, come on in here. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I guess I don't know if Georgia's offense is where it needs to be to kind of do that on a week-to-week basis. I think Georgia could just simply got it rolling against South Carolina and saw no need to change. I think you do see things with Kirby changing a lot. I see this week, Georgia to me is not happy with their wide receivers. They're basically the big all-around 6'2", 195-pound receiver, kind of like what they have a lot of now on the offensive side of the ball. This week, Georgia goes out and offers a young man that I think might just wind up in the class, Jimmy Horn Jr., who has Mecole Hardman type speed. Remember what Georgia was trying last year with Corey Wren, that kind of thunderbolt, that kind of really fast speed demon that looks like maybe he belongs in the Pac-12 or the Big 12 in terms of that jitterbug, quick in and out slot receiver type guys. Man, this guy's really fast. And it to me, it reads like this. No, we're not going to bring those receivers in this year when we still need to keep evolving this offense. I think really, Brandon, one of my topics for the show this week, Mike, one of my show topics for this week was, man, when has Georgia played its best football of the year? Firing on all cylinders, offense, defense, moving the ball, being explosive, being efficient. I think Kirby keeps saying over and over, I don't care how we're explosive. He just wants Georgia to be explosive. He doesn't care how they put points on the board. He just wants points on the board. For me, you got to combine the excitement with Mississippi State. For me, maybe what Georgia could be is the program that throws for 400 one week and then rushes for 300 the next week. I mean, that's kind of what we're kind of going to get with this offensive system as Kirby starts making, those glacier-sized steps away from where he's been and floating into what maybe most of what college football is. Is it protecting your defense? Is it keeping your defense? Yada, yada, yada. It's all that. But eventually he's learning. I think he's learning that this staff is learning that they're going to have the weapons to win a shootout. My pushback on this is simply this. Let's not act that like, some of Georgia's receivers, without calling out specific names, are really deserving of 10 to 15 targets a game right now, especially considering the way they work, the way they know their playbooks, and the way that maybe they haven't had the best overall games so far this year.
Connor, what do you think?
I actually kind of agree with Mike here. I think you look at the way Alabama has evolved in recent seasons. To the point, yes, you said they only ran the ball one time in their final 3 drives in that blowout, but they still threw the ball 26 times. I'm not saying Georgia necessarily needs to come out and turn into Texas Tech or Mike Leach, for example, but there's a medium there that I think Georgia can come out and try and find. There against Mississippi State, as great as the 400 yards passing were, you have to be able to run the ball better. I think Georgia needs to try and find a better medium between 250 yards rushing or 250 yards passing and 200 yards on the ground. You need to be able to do both well if you're going to beat an Alabama, if you're going to beat a Florida, because these teams are good enough to take away one thing you did really well. For example, Clemson, Notre Dame. Notre Dame took away Clemson's running game that day. And DJ Uiagalelei came in and still threw for over 350 yards in that game. You need to be able to do both and have some form of balance there.
So I agree with that, but we would say right now the big difference between Georgia and teams like Alabama and Florida is the fact that Georgia just doesn't throw as much at the beginning of these games as the other teams do. And my reasoning for why that's the case is right now the Georgia passing attack is not as fully formed as what Florida's is. It's not as fully formed as what Alabama's is. Even though Alabama has a new quarterback in place for 2020 in comparison to previous years, he is still stepping into an offense that's been humming right along for a couple of years. I would suggest, Connor, and I want your response to this, this is still a Georgia offense that's very much a work in progress. But when you are 30-plus points one week and then 45-plus points the following week without the benefit of a defensive touchdown, what Georgia has typically needed in recent years to get into the 40s, when you are that 2 weeks in a row, it is a sign of improvement offensively. It may be incremental, and the gap between Georgia and a team like Alabama on the offensive side may still be great. But to me, the story for Georgia on Saturday was a happy one and a good one of a Georgia offense, even against overmatched opponents, that's showing some signs that it's ready to get better, because 2019 and large portions of 2020, this offense has been a long way from that, I believe.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that. It was a positive step. I personally don't care all that much the one-pass ratio in a fourth quarter of a 30-point blowout. But I do think, in general, Georgia does probably need to throw the ball a little bit more and not so much necessarily rely on, hey, we're just going to try and run the ball and run this game out of here. I think, and again, the South Carolina game is a weird scenario because that team is obviously shorthanded. There is the Mike Bobo factor, which I believe absolutely played a role in there. If that were Dan Mullen out there on the other sideline, Kirby wouldn't have, I believe, let up in the manner that he did. But this is a Georgia team because, again, you look and saw in 2018 when Georgia, again, they tried to just run the ball and they didn't necessarily develop those wide receivers. And when you were not developing those receivers late in games and the guys ahead of them leave, you're kind of left with a big hole at wide receiver, which is what you got you into so much trouble during the 2019 season.
Mike, I'll give you the last word on this topic. What do you want to see on Saturday?
I agree with Connor. What I want to see is I want to see Georgia open it up and have fun. I want to see the receivers have big games. I want to see JT Daniels air it out. I want to see running backs running into wide gaps because Georgia spread it out so much with the pass game that Samir White's, vision doesn't matter because nobody's there because there's only 5 guys in the box because they're so afraid and they don't know who to double because if they don't double Pickens, he kills them. And Jermaine Burton shows you, as he did against Mississippi State, don't single him. Karis Jackson redeems himself after, a bad game and throwing an interception back at some. Karis Jackson is working his way into an NFL conversation in my book. Arian Smith, a guy that Kirby says needs work, gets work in the fourth quarter. To your point, BA, they're not Clemson, they're not Alabama. And the fourth quarter of these games against also-rans is when you take advantage of it. Everybody else had these BS games at the start of the season. Georgia didn't have the benefit of trucking somebody in week 3 or 4 or 2 to get their offense polished up for Florida. And they didn't have a 2-week break in the middle of the season, for COVID tracing or whatever. They had to play a grind, and it was a mess, and it was hard to get kids in games, and it was hard to build that locker room fun because not everybody was playing. When everybody's playing, they have fun. Just like Cover 4, BA, all 4 of us on the screen, we're all having a good time. When it's just one person, we're all sitting back, it's not as much fun. But this is interact. It's the same way on a football team. Those guys want to play. Okay, yes, they're happy for a teammate, but at the end of the day, they're at Georgia because they want to be a receiver. If you've got 2 kids that are receivers and everybody's telling your kid, hey, listen, you come to us, we're going to throw. You come to us. And the kid's sitting there and he goes, Dad, I don't know what to do. Georgia, Florida, Clemson, they're all telling me they're going to throw me 10 targets a game. Which one do I believe? They get out the stats and they go, which one do you believe, son?
Hey, Brandon, I got something I got to throw in here. I'm not going to rest with here's the thing. I think it was more important. I think Mike said it. It's more important last week for Georgia to have fun and look like it's having fun out there playing football. It's not as important to look like they can throw the ball like Florida and Alabama. I'm going to push back on this. The reason why Georgia can't throw the football like Florida and Alabama and Clemson is because they don't throw the ball as well as Florida and Alabama and Clemson. They don't have the pieces. They don't have a Trask. They don't have the receivers. They don't have the pieces to throw like those guys.
Wait a minute. You don't think you're saying that JT Daniels doesn't belong in that conversation with some of these great quarterbacks yet?
Yeah, but I'm saying look at all the pieces. Trask is able to mirror an elite arm, elite read and recognition of 4 or 5 years in the league, at least 4 or 5 years in college football, with a guy that cannot be covered in Kyle Pitts. And then Justin Shorter, a former 5-star, he's 4 years into college. The same thing with Trevon Grimes, a guy who's 3-4 years into college. Those guys were, whether they bumped around or whatever, they were all more highly rated than the receivers Georgia has now, save for George Pickens, who's been up and down this year. Let's just call it what it is. To say Georgia can throw the ball like those teams, like an Ohio State, like an Alabama. Man, Alabama can lose Waddle and go down to John Mechie, and John Mechie can look like Waddle in that offense.
Yeah.
Georgia, maybe when Blaylock is there, maybe when Burton is in year 2, maybe when Arian Smith is the pieces are not there yet. And that's why I think for those that think, hey, why can't Georgia look like Florida and Alabama and do this throwing the ball through the air? They're just not there yet.
Jeff, I think you're right about that. I think it's a logical fallacy to assume that Georgia only scored 45 points on Saturday against South Carolina because it didn't throw the ball enough. When if you want to use even the previous week as a data point on this, certainly the last 2 years, if Georgia had thrown the ball more on Saturday, there's a very good chance they would have scored fewer points than they actually did because of where I think the passing game development is the moment. It doesn't mean that I don't think that JT Daniels can be a good quarterback at Georgia. I think he can be. But, Mike, to answer the question you asked a moment ago, no, I don't put JT Daniels anywhere near the conversation with guys like Mac Jones right now. I can't. My pride won't allow me to mention Kyle Trask in this conversation, so I'm gonna leave him out of it. But Mac Jones, with all due respect to Daniels, who I think is a prospect, and I've enjoyed watching the last 2 weeks, but it's still 2 weeks. And, last week wasn't perfect. So yeah, I think this is very much a Georgia passing game. It's very much a work in progress. And if Georgia throws more, there's a chance they probably score less.
I have a question. How do you develop the passing game then into what Alabama and into what Florida have done there?
That's a very good question. I think it's unfortunately a process that moves deliberately by giving Arian Smith experience, by giving Jermaine Burton experience, by giving George Pickens even more experience. I think you increase the chances that you can be there by next year. But the thing that Mike described a moment ago, of essentially the greatest show on turf, that club is not in Georgia's bag for this year. It's just not, at least in my mind.
But you still have to, I think, commit to getting there in 2021, and that starts by doing it in 2020.
Joe Burrow, LSU, you look at how they finished. We couldn't have seen what Joe Burrow and LSU did coming, but they did. We got a little taste of it when we went down and covered that game at LSU and we watched Joe Burrow convert on 4 fourth-down runs. One reason why he's better than either one of these Heisman Trophy guys, because they're both statues and neither one of them is going to come close to being Joe Burrow pre-injury with the Cincinnati Bengals. They're both system quarterbacks. I'm not ready to say that JT Daniels isn't as good. I think he did some things. I think if you put Mac Jones or Kyle Trask at USC, I think he would have got sacked as many times. I think if you put Mac Jones or Kyle Trask at Tennessee, I don't think the Vols would be lighting it up and winning the SEC East. I think they're guys that, just like anybody else that plays quarterback, it's the most dependent position in sports. You can only be so good. And I know I always date myself. I was playing the corny music before the show, but I know you guys know that Steve Young was nobody with the Buccaneers and was a Hall of Famer with the San Francisco 49ers. So I think what Connor's saying is start the process for next year. This year, send a message to your players. This is what we're going to be. This is going to be the identity, instead of going out there, the chameleon every week, the kaleidoscope offense. And what did Kirby have for breakfast today? Well, we don't know. We'll find out on game day. We worked on all these plays. We got to do what they give us. Can't just go out there and say, we're going to run the ball or we're going to throw the ball. We got to see what they give us on defense.
Yeah, I don't completely disagree with either one of you, even though admittedly I was actually, as a fan, pretty entertained, and I enjoyed what happened last Saturday against South Carolina. So, Mike, quickly, because I want Connor to answer this too. How do you measure? How do you, in simple terms, what do you specifically want to see Georgia do? Is it throwing the ball on first down? Is it throwing the ball as a ratio in comparison to running plays? What is a simple measurement? And Connor, if you don't mind, I want you to answer this as well. What is a simple measurement that would demonstrate the commitment necessary to throwing the football? Because the one thing we're all on the same page, I believe, is when you face an Alabama again, you better be able to throw with them or you're not going to beat them. So I totally agree with you on that. You seem to want to see that philosophy in place on Saturday against Vanderbilt. So how would you measure? And this is not a rhetorical question.
Yeah, I think Kirby Smith said it best: score points. And he can say they were trying to score points, but it's 3rd and 20. Excuse me, it's 3rd and 15 at the 20-yard line in the third quarter. You're already in field goal range, and you run the football. You don't take another target in the end zone. Burton just dropped one on the previous play. Why don't you go back in the end zone? 3rd and 15. You're already in field goal range. The decision to run the ball there. So Kirby, smart, I believe, needs to try to be more aggressive scoring points. I know he likes to control the clock. I understand that. But in games like this, let's be honest, South Carolina wasn't going to come back and win. They can do whatever they want against Vanderbilt. I want to see I want to see Kirby light up the scoreboard and quit. Don't be afraid to score 60 points. Don't call on, there was a time when Coach Saban came on the headset and said, don't run it up. Well, when you've won 4 national championships, you can do that. When you're trying to win back your fan base and you're making $6 million a year and your defense gave up over 500 yards in 2 losses, you better light up the scoreboard, because Georgia fans want to see a top 5 team. They want to see a team that's dominant, that wipes out opponents, and that lures great offensive players to be a part of a team scoring 50. And it's business as usual. 28-38. Everybody here was like, oh my gosh, throw a party. What a parade. That's just another day at the office in Gainesville. That's just a average performance for Trevor Lawrence. Georgia's got to change the mindset, BA, and I don't know exactly how to do that. but I know that putting points on the board and lighting up these opponents, whether they're your friends or they're not your friends, is what earns you $6 million a year.
So, Connor, specifically in terms of a more pass-friendly direction, how would you measure it on Saturday?
Since I believe the start of the 2018 season, Clemson and Alabama combined have had 7 games in which they've had fewer than 25 pass attempts. In the last 2 years combined, Georgia has had 5. I think 25 is the golden number. If you can just get to that as a Georgia program every week, or try at least to get in that 20 to 25 range where you can throw and you can show that consistently we're able to do that against lesser teams. Because look, when you're running the ball for 7.2 yards per carry and 330 yards a game, you're obviously going to take that. And that's not sort of what my issue is. But you need to at least show that you're able to consistently throw the ball, because you're going to be asked to do it to win these big games, because Georgia was asked to do it against Florida and they outright couldn't. And I think if Stetson Bennett had been able to do it a little bit more against Kentucky, maybe he's a little bit more confident in doing it against, say, Florida.
Let me move on here. Topic number 3 on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. I think this is really interesting. When Jeff brought this up before the show, and admittedly, this is a little bit of a hot button for me, in that Georgia 2 weeks ago was number 9, or I should say a week ago, in the college football playoff top 25, moved up to 8 this week. And in both weeks, there's been a lot of criticism of Georgia for where they're ranked. And on one hand, this seems to be somewhat understandable, given the fact that Georgia lost in pretty ugly fashion both of its biggest games of the season this year. But I'm also reminded of some of the chatter at the very beginning of the year before the season began, in a year in which choosing 4 playoff teams was going to be so difficult. Hey, maybe we should expand the playoff. Maybe we should have an 8-team playoff this year. Well, when you see Georgia number 8, it's easy to imagine what would happen if there was an 8-team playoff, and Georgia made it in as the number 8 team in that playoff. Jeff, I got to tell you something. For as disappointed as Georgia fans have been for most this year, measuring Georgia only by the SEC losses that's accrued, I don't think is the ultimate way to understand how good of a college football team is. If Georgia could be in an 8-team playoff, playing some teams outside the SEC, I'm actually fairly confident that Georgia would still do pretty well in that playoff. Probably not win the national championship, because we've seen them against the best team in the country, but beating somebody, maybe beating a couple of somebodies, I still think that'd be a strong possibility. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, if we look at the mythical bracket, who's in there right now? Notre Dame, Cincinnati, maybe BYU if they keep on winning. Texas A&M. I like Georgia let me couch this. I like Georgia with JT flying the jet, using Mike's terminology there. I like Georgia in those matchups. I think Georgia could win a first-round playoff game in that mythical 18 field. Anything else? You don't give me Richie back. You don't give me Jordan Davis back. Anything, Kendall Milton, that's the same thing. Anything else, I think it's a little dicey, which is basically what this season has shown to be so far.
Connor, what do you think?
So I think you guys are looking at this wrong. I think 18 playoff, it's not enough, because you're still going to have the same 5-6 teams every year. You're getting those 2 teams at the bottom. I think right now college football is a capitalistic sport where the wealthiest of the wealthy, the elites of the elites, are way better off than everyone else. And as Kirk Herbstreit said on Wednesday, I actually believe it is dragging down the sport a little bit. I actually think you expand to 16 teams. That way, making it in it's something where if you're a Georgia fan right now, you're still feeling pretty confident you're going to get in. And those 2 losses to Alabama and Florida, while they sting, yes, they don't submarine your whole season, and they don't give you a reason to check out. They give you a reason to say, hey, over these last couple of games, maybe Georgia can get right, figure something in the playoff, and sort of get hot at the right time and maybe win 2 or 3 games. People will say, well, how can you live in a world where Northwestern or Pitt make it in the playoff? I think that's where we actually need to get to with college football. Have it where every 1 or 2 years, a team like that does get into the college football playoff, and it sort of redefines what people think of success, because every year, if you're not one of the 4 teams, your season's a failure. And that's just going to make it, if you're a Georgia fan, if you're a Notre Dame fan, unless you're an Alabama, Clemson, and maybe even an Ohio State fan, it's going to make you largely very unhappy.
Yeah, I actually don't hate that argument, Connor. I've always, if there was expansion, I prefer 8 over 16 typically, but that's a pretty good argument for 16 right there. But Mike, let me tell you why I like this as a topic. Because for a Georgia fan, it hits very close to home. Georgia's essentially been the 2nd best team in the SEC, 5th best team in the country for the last couple of years. And when you only measure yourself against a national champion LSU or a national runner-up Alabama, there's a way of feeling like there's just a chasm separating you from the very best in college football. But the truth is that Georgia doesn't get to play the 3rd best team in the Big Ten. They don't get to play the 3rd best team in the Big 12 very much. And If this were college basketball where games like that took place with regularity, I got to tell you something. Even in a year like this where Georgia's had problems at quarterback and, as Jeff said, battled injuries, frankly, you give me a chance to see Georgia play some of the so-called best of the rest in some of these other leagues, I frankly still think Georgia would do fine, even though it got its clock cleaned by Alabama and did not have a very pretty showing against Florida. You put Georgia against Wisconsin, Northwestern, an Oklahoma State, an Iowa State. I like Georgia just fine in those games.
Yeah, you make a good argument to drop Georgia Tech and go home and home with some of those top 25 teams. I would agree with that. As far as the playoffs go, they played 6 playoff games this year. Okay, they were knocked out when they lost to Florida on November the 6th. The beauty of college football is that every weekend does count. It really matters. When Michigan State took down Northwestern, oh my gosh, Reese Davis couldn't jump off that bandwagon fast enough. He's going to have to find a new team to get behind. Everybody wants to champion somebody. You know, I dared to say that Kyle Trask wasn't the runaway favorite, and I got absolutely destroyed for a week, even though when you look at the numbers, Mac Jones has better stats. Everybody wants the flavor of the month. The great thing about college football is that every Saturday, everything changes. One Saturday can change everything. I was sitting in Neyland Stadium when they announced that Nick Saban and Michigan State knocked off Ohio State, and everybody knew that Tennessee was in the national championship game until they almost lost the next week against Arkansas. More drama. But had that not been a playoff game in and of itself, you would have said, oh, that's cool. They pulled it out. They were going to make an 8-team or 16 playoff anyway. To me, that's what separates college football, those great Saturday afternoons on campus. Now, if you're going to play your games in an NFL stadium, maybe then you should just take an NFL mentality. Heck, they want to play their best rivalry every year in an NFL stadium. They want to play their best game next year in an NFL stadium in Charlotte. I say bring them back to campus where you got the college students celebrating and remember, just like you guys remember those magical moments in Sanford Stadium. Jeff, don't use that story about Jacksonville. That's a tough one to beat. But most of these great memories are on campus and in playoff environment. Every Saturday is a playoff in college football.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So, Mike, you got me on a dirt road here. I'm going to just veer back off for a second. Mike, if Georgia and Florida was a home and home, Tech was dropped from the schedule, and Georgia threw the ball 30 times a game, what would you have to talk about, man?
You know what? I'd have to buy.
He'd find a new slant.
I'd have to buy another dog. You know, the one I got right now is so well behaved, though. I just know I can't get one that's going to be that good, that disciplined. You're right, though. I mean, I would probably, I don't know, maybe wanting to see some different alternate. I want to see a black helmet. I know they've been there, right?
No, you don't.
But like all
no,
black.
You don't.
No,
you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't.
I'll show you the footage of the 2009 game against Florida. You can see a black helmet. But I'm going to let you watch it. I don't want to see it anymore myself.
Brandon, if last week with South Carolina, if Georgia's 10 out of 16 for Daniels would have went for 255, would we have just burned through 10 minutes of cover 4 talking about the passing game?
Yeah, Jeff, I think it's like one more completion. You know, Daniels had a couple shots, close in a couple, bad luck here, bad luck there, timing off, whatever else. Like 1 or 2 completions, I do think in that game changes a little bit the way it's perceived.
I would agree, but my bigger issue is George Pickens. I want to see this guy get targets. I think George Pickens has, he's got to touch the football. He's got to touch the football. I mean, this guy is remarkable. I don't know if you guys saw him jump up and catch that ball, but he looked like a pterodactyl snatching another bird of flight out of the air and feathers flying. I mean, there was a South Carolina guy. I mean, that catch was I thought maybe Pickens was swallowing the ball. I mean, it was just such an aggressive moment. And it's just like, feed this guy. He's starving. Just throw it up. It's not a 50-50 ball. It's a 90-10 ball when it's George Pickens.
But
give this guy the ball.
But Mike, and I say this is the biggest George Pickens homer in the world. And people know how much I've loved Pickens in his Georgia career. But on our cover 4 live shows before the season began, I did predict this as a likely storyline that would be talking this season about why George Pickens was not more involved in the offense. This is fairly easy to predict when one wide receiver is perceived to be, and I say this with all due respect to the other guys, head and shoulders above the others. That when Justin Ross has big numbers for Clemson, T. Higgins also has big numbers. When Jerry Jeudy has big numbers for Alabama, a whole host of folks also have big numbers there as well. Jamar Chase wins the Blitnikoff for LSU, but you could have thrown to a number of LSU receivers a year ago that if you really want the best of George Pickens, I believe there's no shortcut to doing that. You've got to get the passing game overall the level raised. And at that point in time, Pickens will have the numbers that you and I both believe that he should have. But Pickens can't lead the Georgia offense. The Georgia offense has to lead George Pickens to this spot.
The quarterback is the offense is the quote that we heard last weekend. And I think that that's key. And I think now that you've got JT Daniels, it's a matter of him earning Kirby Smart's trust. It's a matter of Kirby Smart deciding, okay, how do I want to build this thing around JT? Obviously, you gave him a national television appearance this week. I mean, that's Kirby's ultimate compliment to a player is when he puts him out there in front of the media, or it's his ultimate diss to the media when he sends the same tight end out there 6 times and only has 3 catches. One way or another, he's sending a message by who he sends out there. But putting JT on national television was Kirby's way of saying, you're the guy.
Let me do this really quick. It's our final topic, Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Greg McGarity has announced his retirement. There is a search for his replacement. Obviously, the legacy of McGarity will be talked about a lot in the time to come. Will Josh Brooks be the guy that steps in as the replacement? How many other people will really even be considered for the job? You know, a lot of this stuff will be discussed. But, Jeff, as I've said on my show this week, I'm almost less interested in who gets the job than I am in what the job is going to entail going forward. You've been around Georgia for a long time, Jeff. What do you think Georgia fans want from the next athletic director? And I'll let you answer it however you want.
Let me see if I can say this within 10 seconds. Don't tick off Kirby. Grow the basketball program. I think that's what they want. Don't tick off Kirby. Grow the basketball programs.
What do you think, Connor?
I don't know necessarily what they want. I know what they don't want. They don't want a guy who is being praised for safeguarding the finances, of not opening things up, of not continuing to expand. I think Greg McGarity was much maligned early on in his career. He made the big decision, his legacy-defining decision, to move on from Mark Richt to bring in Kirby Smart. And when he did that, he opened up the purses. Segment got renovated. New indoor practice facility, west end zone, football standalone building. These things are going to continue to get built. And ultimately, I think Georgia just want to see you keep up with the Joneses, keep up with the slides at Clemson, the waterfalls at Alabama, things of that nature.
What do you think matters for the next athletic director, Mike?
I agree with Jeff and Connor, but even beyond that, I think you need somebody that's going to be able to handle the name, image, likeness licensing. I mean, that's going to be the next big thing, is which school can manage that the best and get these guys or work with these guys as they work on name, image, likeness and the money that they're going to make off of it. So it's going to take someone with that progressive mind. I did hear, the secondary sports come up. I asked the questions, but I'd had somebody say to me, hey, why can't Georgia be good in some of these non-revenue sports like Florida is? I think there's going to be more pressure. What is it? A rising tide raises all ships. I think now that these facilities are going up, and I think that, we see Georgia ranked in the top 15 in academics. All you guys, have seen that, and certainly UGA graduates celebrate. But I just think the standards at Georgia, the expectations are going up. And what we see in these conversations we're having, BA, and the differences of opinions is, you and Connor and Jeff have seen Georgia grow from this pretty good program to this elite. And I pretty much landed on the doorstep when Georgia was there and said, okay, take the next step. So I don't have the same appreciation for how far Georgia's come as people that have followed the program forever. I landed here saying, this is a championship program. Let's go. This program is on the doorstep, and all they've got to do is knock out that final opponent, that final board in the video game that you play over and over and over. And Nick Saban is in Bowser Castle. Why can't we get over the lava? That's how close Georgia is to grabbing that flag. There's one guy that's between you and a championship, and you've got to start making decisions in your athletic department, with your scheduling, with your play calling, that gets you to beat Bowser and clear the lava and bring the flag down. So that might be a little bit of an old.
What does Greg McGarity have to do with the Georgia offensive play calling?
Shooting the shells at the, I'm just saying, I feel like Greg McGarity did it. And in hindsight, I think Connor and you guys would admit this, in hindsight, it actually worked out for Georgia. They've got this $100 million fund. Everybody else is asking coaches to take pay cuts, or Clemson cutting how embarrassing for Clemson, by the way. How doggone embarrassing for Clemson that they got to cut out a track program. With all the money they're making as a championship, all the money they got in their football bill, they got more money in their entertainment lounge than the entire track program that they just cut. They feed those guys more pizzas than that track program spends in a year. And they cut a program. Georgia didn't have to do that. They didn't have to lay anybody off, didn't have to cut any corners. So in a way, Greg McGarity, I think, Connor, in a way, it kind of worked out in the long run.
Let's take a couple comments here. It's our Cover 4 Live. We'll transition to Cover More now, give you a chance to weigh in and share your thoughts. The one thing I will say while comments kind of roll in here for a little bit, I won't go so far as endorsing Josh Brooks for the job because who really cares what I think. But I will say that one of the things I do like about Brooks is that he seems to be a fan-friendly presence. Listen, I'm not going to pretend that the number one job of an athletic director isn't raising money. It is, and rich people is how you raise money. But you've still got to give the appearance of caring about fans and doing things that fans like. And Brooks seems to be able to thread that needle pretty well in terms of some of the public-facing things that he's done at Georgia in the past. So if it's not Brooks who gets the job, I hope it's someone who understands that part of it, which is that, listen, behind the scenes, you got to raise a bunch of money and no one wants to see how the sausage is made on that. But there is still a front of the house responsibility of making rank and file Georgia fans, who some of which can only afford to buy a T-shirt. They can't afford to buy the tickets. They can't afford to do this. Their only connection to Georgia is a T-shirt and a television set. You've got to make them feel a part of this somehow too, even if that's not the prime directive of your job. And he seems to be pretty good at that part of it. So from that standpoint, Georgia could be in good hands if that's the direction the program chooses to go. Trey Edwards says, enjoyed the show and the fellowship. Y'all have a good one. Trey, it's nice to be, and I'm sure all of you would echo this as well, it's nice to be able to be that gathering spot for folks here on a Thursday night, to hang out and chat with us a little bit, but also talk with each other in the comment section. I'm happy to hear that that's going on.
I have a Cover More question. Season ends today. Who are your Heisman Trophy top 4? Season is over. It is done. I need your top 4. I'm going to get the answer from you, Mike, that Paul Feinbaum couldn't.
Right now, the top 4 or 5 guys, I mean, Mac Jones and Kyle Trask and Trevor Lawrence are obviously, I think, at the top of the list. I think the 4th spot is really debatable. I mean, I'm starting to wonder if, because here's the question that I would ask you guys. If it really goes to the best player in college football, do we refer to who we think is going to be picked number 1? Does it go to the most deserving? Does it go to the guy with the best stats, or does it go to the MVP? The great thing about the Heisman is it's like this college football playoff committee. Everybody uses whatever metric or whatever measurement they want. But the reality, my vote, I don't know. I haven't ranked them, and I'll wait until the end. I'll get like a feel for it, like that last
I said
week.
If it ends today. That was the question. I'm not asking you if the season is over.
Well, I can't answer it because I haven't seen Alabama play Florida, because I haven't seen whether Clemson beats Notre Dame, because I haven't seen if Kyle Pitts has 2 more 3-touchdown catch games, or if Najee Harris goes for 8 touchdowns in one game. I mean, that's the whole beauty of it. I mean, right now, that list I gave you is probably –
We've gone late here, but I am curious about this because I'm only partially aware of what the controversy even is. Mike, what was the Heisman-related controversy? I saw like some Twitter stuff about this, almost more than I wanted. I came this close to reaching the mute button. But
me too.
But what was the controversy?
If I could unmute myself, I would. Paul wanted the list, just like Connor. I want to know the list. I want to know the list. I don't have a list. Number 1, as a Heisman voter, you're not supposed to be putting out lists until after the vote. That's one of the things they ask you to do. And in all honestly, you guys know how busy I am with Georgia football. I need to look at things. But I will say the last week after that whole blow up, I said, okay, let me look at this, because all I said was, I don't have a list. I put Trask, top 4, top 5. Somehow it turned into me having Kyle Trask 5th or 4th, and I don't even have a list. I just said he'd be in that top 4 or 5 because at the time I was trying to make the point. Justin Fields hadn't played in weeks. Trevor Lawrence hadn't played in weeks. Mac Jones was doing great things. I think Najee Harris is having a very underrated year. I don't know why he's not getting discussed. And Pitts, obviously, now he's entered the conversation. So, but the crux of it was that because I said Trask was in the top 4 or 5, Florida fans made this giant leap that I had him ranked 4th or 5th, when in fact I was just trying to say he's somewhere in the top 4 or 5.
But it's not controversial, Connor, is it? I mean, like if you gave me a vote, I'm not a member of the Coastal Elite Media, so I don't have one. But if you gave me a vote, I think I probably would vote for Mac Jones. It's not controversial to vote for Jones over Trask, is it?
No, I don't think so. Quite frankly, I wouldn't have either of those guys 1 and 2. 1, I would have Kyle Pitts. 2, I would have Devontae Smith. 3, I would take Trevor Lawrence, given some of the issues that Clemson has had with their skill players this year. 4, I take Kyle Trask, and 5, I take Mac Jones. And I have Trask over Jones just because I believe Trask has asked to do a lot more for Florida there. And I just gave you my list. So,
but here's the thing about having Mac Jones that low. At this point in time, we really got to go. You can say that he's not the best player in his own offense, and he might not be. Najee Harris, Devontae Smith may both be better. And at one point in time, I guess Jalen Waddle probably was as well. But if there's no Mac Jones, none of this stuff is happening. I mean, it is one of those things where he may not be the best player in the offense, but the offense is not function if he doesn't step in the way that he plays this year. And gosh knows I don't want to give him any credit for it because I don't like Alabama either. But I believe I'd have to give him my vote just because the fact that they are just obliterating people. And, he's the guy that post Tua Tagovailoa has kept that train on the tracks. I believe I'd have to reward him for that, especially since Justin Fields is not really playing and Trevor Lawrence is not playing very much.
I'd actually argue that Devontae Smith has elevated his game so much that, again, he's 170 yards and 8 catches and multiple touchdowns every week now. Jeff, do you have a top 4 or 5?
Yeah, it was funny. It morphed around that. I was kind of trying to be serious and kind of trying to be smarmy. I think the way Mike could have made a lot of friends on Twitter was to rank Pitts above Trask, and then those Gator folks could not spew venom at him anymore because it's like, hey, I see what I see, and I'm not disparaging one Gator over another. I think Devonta Smith needs to be really high up in that rankings. I think somebody said earlier that the Heisman is it's kind of like a looking glass. Everybody's going to interpret what they think is the nation's best player, whether it's the guy with the most skill set that's having a great year on a very good team, or whether that's the guy that's the most valuable player who's having the most outstanding season imaginable. I think that gets skewed a lot, kind of like sabermetrics and WAR and replacement value players in baseball. But for me, I think Devonta Smith has had a heck of a year. He's broken the SEC records. He's done so while losing Jalen Waddle on the other side. And Connor, I don't think you're off base a lot with having Pitts there rated higher than Mac Jones. And also, and again, I'm surprised we didn't mention Justin Fields as well.
You got to play a football. Listen, I love Justin Fields. I'm a Justin Fields fan, but you got to play a football game to be included in any of this stuff. Playoff, Heisman, whatever else. They played 4 games. I mean, and I'm a Fields guy. I like Fields. I wish he's playing more games. I want to watch him play. But you can't play 4 games and be the Heisman Trophy winner. You just can't do it.
Can't do that. You be the midseason stake horse or whatever. It's funny how people go round and round about this. But man, I don't even know if this Heisman is what it's ever going to be when you're looking at a Heisman.
Oh, no.
9, 10 seasons, 8, 9 games of a season. I think the other thing we're not mentioning here that bolsters the SEC candidacy is, man, they're going against the SEC defenses, the SEC guys every year. This was the year maybe where a defensive player could have really gotten in the mix. I personally would have thought, Chase Young would still have only played 4 games, but this type of season, Chase Young would have definitely qualified maybe number 1, number 2, number 3 in the country for that. And you don't have a running back this year that's really, really special. Chuba Hubbard kind of derailed his season a lot. Interesting thing.
Well, let me ask you this, just to finish it up here, Jeff. Zach Wilson getting in a plane or a bus or whatever else, going from Provo to Myrtle Beach on Saturday for the Coastal Carolina game. Could the BYU quarterback make a name for himself and enter this fray? He's already going to be a first-round pick. Could Wilson do something to get his name out there? Jeff, let's just go real quick on this. Jeff?
Yeah, man, that's really funny. A BYU quarterback.
It's not funny. That's a good game. I'm excited about BYU Coastal on Saturday.
Just think about that. That's so 2020. The BYU quarterback validates his Heisman candidacy by winning at Coastal Carolina. Come on, brother. You know how weird that sounds.
Connor, what do you think?
He can get in the Zoom room with a great game and a big win.
Look, as much as BA worships at the church of Justin Fields, I'm there every Saturday with Zach Wilson as well. That dude is a special talent, and it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if he lights up Coastal this week, plays well against San Diego State. Maybe they figure out a way to get another game there with BYU, and he's a Heisman Trophy finalist. I
mean, Mike, you got to acknowledge this. I saw this on social media earlier, and I promise we're about to end the show. Like the BYU tractor trailers found out about the game today. They got on the road and started going from Provo to Myrtle Beach, like right now. I mean, they are literally doing the Smokey and the Bandit. Yeah, I mean, they got a bunch of Coors beer in the back. They're doing the Smokey and the Bandit run to get to Myrtle Beach. Like they've got like no time to speak. It is truly eastbound and down. I mean, you got to love this, right? I mean, for all the awful stuff we've had in 2020, this is actually, a couple of football teams trying to find a way to make it work. Game day in the beautiful, locale of Myrtle Beach, great golf destination that it is. That's all just really fun on Saturday, I believe.
Well, if Kirby's done throwing, all the Georgia fans will be ready to turn the channel by 5:30 and watch that game. I can tell you that. I don't think this gets this guy in the top. It may get him to New York so that he can open the door for the other guys to walk in. Might get him to the ceremony, but the BYU quarterback, I think it would be very difficult. It would take a lot. It could happen, but I haven't evaluated, but it would take a lot to happen if BYU was maybe the only undefeated team. Like if Alabama lost to Florida, after Florida lost to Tennessee, after Clemson beat Notre Dame, and this guy is just towering above, and they hang like 56 on Coastal Carolina. But because of the bias, the media bias, the recent, all that, it's going to be really hard. It took everything in 1984 for BYU to win a national championship. And oh, by the way, BYU wanted to play in the Sugar Bowl. They wanted to play in the Orange Bowl, and they wouldn't invite them. That's why they had to play a 6-5 Michigan. I got that story out of Lavelle Edwards a year before he died. I always make sure I tell people, don't blame that 84 BYU team. Nobody else wanted to play him.
There you go.
Feel better now.
Boy, a lot of boxes got checked at the end of the show. Lavelle Edwards, Jeff mentioned some baseball analytics.
If you're playing Cover 4 bingo, we've got Coors Beer, we've got Smokey and the Bandit, we've got Eastbound and Down, and we got Mike ripping off some Super Mario Brothers references like they're 50% off on the rack on clearance.
All
Bingo,
right.
Cover 4. That's weirdest thing.
I've done 4 broadcasts today. I'm tired. All right. Thanks, everybody. Connor, Jeff, Mike, we'll read you at DawgNation.com. Jeff, I'll see you on DawgNation Daily. Boy, a lot of recruiting stuff. Did not really get a ton into that today, but a lot of recruiting stuff over the course of the next couple of weeks. Red hot for the class of 2022, and ear to the ground. Sounds like 2021's got some pretty good rumblings going here as of late, too. So we'll cover all of that with Jeff on the pages of DawgNation.com and, of course, on DawgNation Daily tomorrow. Thanks to all of you for being here on Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Have a great night. Enjoy the weekend, everybody.